Free markets, when allowed to operate, will always turn scarcity into abundance. Will always turn today's luxuries into something that everyone can afford tomorrow.
Welcome everyone to this episode of the Liberty Ventures podcast, live from Freedom Fest 2024. And I am absolutely thrilled to be speaking with the legendary Steve Forbes today, who I think everyone already knows is the editor-in-chief and chairman of Forbes Media, a legendary businessman, former candidate for the US presidency, and just incredible advocate of liberty. Steve, I so appreciate you taking the time out of this conference to speak with the Liberty Ventures community today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it, and always got to fight for what's right.
We absolutely do. And over the course of your whole career, you have fought for what's right. And while I think everyone knows your journey, I'm really curious to actually hear what your personal life journey and career has been like from your own perspective. What are the highlights, the challenges you faced, and what's driven you to fight for what's right this whole way through?
Well, it's first curiosity, finding out why things worked in the past and why they didn't, which is why history is always fun. It's about people and what's happened in the past. And everyone now quotes Mark Twain, history may not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so human nature does not change, times and circumstances do. I got exposed to the media business at a fairly young age. My grandfather started our company back in 1917. And grew up in that kind of atmosphere. When I was in grade school, I did news sheets from time to time. Once I even tried to do one rating my teachers. I figured they grade me, why can't I grade them? That did not go very far. But the key thing is Lincoln is right. Sometimes events control you more than you control events, but you keep plugging ahead. As we say in our achievement series, it does not always go in a straight direction. And the other thing is there's no playbook for a lot of things. When the internet came along and destroyed the old print model, upset media, we had to remind ourselves. The great Peter Drucker, a management guru, passed away a number of years ago, but he liked to remind people, he said, every organization should remind itself, what is your purpose? What is it you're trying to achieve? And if you do that, you don't get quite as hung up if the means to achieve it change. So you may be doing things very radically different, but it's still the same goal.
And we often think about purpose as something that's emphasized by people like John Mackey with conscious capitalism or the Shared Values Initiative. But it's interesting you point out that it goes back to Stephen Drucker, actually. That's what defines a business, is a common purpose that people are working towards.
Well, it's called culture, capital, culture in a business. And whether in our achievement series, one of the people we highlight is Annie Malone, first African-American woman to become a millionaire. Today would be a billionaire. And with her people, she's made products, hair products, shampoos and the like. And she had a certain way of things. She wanted things done. And so the 75,000 agents she had around the world all had what she called the Poirot method. Teaching how you do things, what you do and don't do. Fred Harvey, who created the first really national chain of restaurants along the railroad routes in the 1880s, 1890s, had served good food, which was rare in those days, especially along railroad routes. It was slop. But he had nice restaurants, and the waitresses were called the Harvey girls, often single women coming in, working, getting married, and then moving off. But there are certain things that they were supposed to do. And so he created a culture. Judy Garland made a movie about them, the Harvey girls, back in the late 1940s. So creating a corporate culture. So all of that you have to keep in mind. It's about people, and it's also about cash flow. One of the things that trips up entrepreneurs is not having enough, finding out that they didn't control this seemingly simple thing called cash flow. And my father got a lesson in it at a very young age. During the Depression, the company was nearly destroyed by the Great Depression. And each afternoon, my father worked in what they call the mail cage in those days, in the basement. You actually physically opened mail in those days. And as a kid, He would work there in the afternoon. Every afternoon, my grandfather would come down. The bookkeeper was nearby. How did we do that day? And usually the answer was very discouraging. And one day the bookkeeper said, "Mr. Forbes, I got great news for you. We made a profit this month." My grandfather looked at him and said, "Young man, I don't give a damn what your books show. How much money do we have in the bank?" So those are the kinds of things that keep you going. And again, it's about service. And my father liked to say, if you think you've arrived, you're ready to be shown the door. The environment does not stay the same.
Always changes. And what you're talking about here really are great examples of capitalism in action. This incredible system of voluntary trade and cooperation between peoples that has led to human flourishing the past 200 years is something that's pretty abstract usually, and you're giving great examples of people living it out.
Well, that's the whole purpose of our achievement series.
Which I want you to talk a little bit more about. This is a series you're doing with isit.org, a great organization, to especially reach young people with these messages.
Yes, and
right?
when you talk about free markets, free enterprise, capitalism, they're abstractions to people. What are you talking about? After all, socialism sounds like social. What's wrong with that? and so the best teacher, we should have learned it from the Bible, is parables, stories. And so we highlight people, names largely forgotten, but who created the modern world. And we don't just tell their stories in 3 to 4 minutes, there's also a lesson attached to it. In the case of Margaret Rudkin, nobody's ever heard of her. She had a kid who had health problems. One of the things he could not eat was bread. And her physician told her there's a certain kind of wheat, the only thing he could ingest. And so she created modern whole wheat bread in her kitchen, using a coffee grinder to grind the wheat. And it worked for the kid. The doctor was impressed. Other doctors recommended it. And she was in the bread business. She named it after the farm she's living on, Pepperidge Farm. And so then she went to Europe, found a great chocolate formula that gave us Milano cookies and the like. Trip to Switzerland gave us the goldfish crackers that no parent can live without. So she had a family problem, but she turned it into a business that benefited not only her, but countless others. I mentioned Annie Malone. She did well, but so did the 75,000 agents she had. They learned, and so they bettered their lives. The people who bought the products had a better life. Mm-hmm. So again, as you say, voluntary. Somebody has to it's a voluntary exchange. And some exchanges are more fun than others. Buying electricity is no fun, although people who complain about the electricity bill don't hesitate to go out and spend $400 on a pair of blue jeans that look like they came out of a dumpster. You know, the more shredded it looks, the more high class it is. So, but that's the nature of consumers offering and receiving.
And what you highlighted with some of those examples of these incredible entrepreneurs is that business really is about solving problems for people. That
not only solving problems, but also dealing with seeing an opportunity. Mm-hmm. For example, radio was invented in the late teens, early 20s. Huge advance. We take it for granted today. We're so spoiled. But the idea of sending voices in the air and having it go hundreds or thousands of miles away was phenomenal. Instead of you could communicate with people, not just in a crowd or on the phone, but hundreds of thousands, millions of people you don't even see. You could have an intimate conversation in effect. So radio was invented. People wonder, what do we use it for? Westinghouse had it in Pittsburgh. What do we use it? Community boards? What's this for? A fellow named Sarnoff David Sarnoff came up with the idea, let's do programming. And his superiors thought this is, what are you talking about? And he persuaded them. They did the first radio broadcast, was a boxing match between two heavyweight contenders. And hundreds, even though it was static and everything, hundreds of thousands of people listened in. And even today, the one thing that will sell in media is live sports. It's not enough to invent something. You have to find a use for it. What is this thing useful for? He did. Or taking something that is already around, but finding new amplifications for it. And so what these stories, every story has a lesson with it, but not in a preachy way, but it evolves from the way the story is told.
That's what I love about your achievement series, is that these are real life examples of entrepreneurs, people who are leveraging capitalism to not only solve a problem, but create a vision of the future that makes people's lives better and advances humanity forward, that can be an example for young people to imagine themselves doing as well.
That's the thing. They learn by seeing stories of other people. Their curiosity is aroused. They think this is a kind of cool thing. And stimulates them. It's an inspiration to them. And so it's not somebody waving a finger that puts you back. It's, that's very interesting. That's pretty cool. And that's what excites people. And so we hope this series will excite young people and those of us who are a little older.
Because everyone is inspired by stories. And I have to imagine that your interest in this series and why you wanted to create this is in part due to your experience in media and knowing the power of stories in influencing individuals.
Well, people respond to examples, real life examples. That's why you have the phrase, for example, for instance. It brings it to life. And too often in communications, we get too abstract.
And as a part of that, I would love for you to say a little bit more about how this series is actually reaching young people. It's going out to high schools across the country.
Yes, well, that's right? What it focuses on is providing content and lesson plans and the like to enable teachers to teach. And so they've been involved in the free to choose. I mean, that came in the early 1980s. Milton Friedman, he's the one who discovered Hong Kong. So they've been continuing that spirit of that for decades. But how do you, these stories aren't political. We're not advocating, a flat tax or something. But people pick it up. People see something like that and say, wow. I mean, you take Julia Morgan, a woman 5 foot tall, first licensed architect in California in the early 1900s. Barriers don't keep these people down. And she saw in Europe what they call reinforced concrete was used for foundations. She got the idea, why not use it in buildings? And created structures that could withstand earthquakes. So who could have planned that? And so so these people see things that others don't. George Eastman, camera photography had been around for decades when he came along, but it was a laborious, time-consuming, and fraught with expense and things that could go wrong. They had to set up a tent to deal with the plates. And the gel that you put on the plates, very, very complicated, messy process. And he eventually came up with simple cameras, not easy. Went through some evolutions. He nearly went broke once, but
that happens in entrepreneurship.
But he underscores something about free markets. Free markets, when allowed to operate, will always turn scarcity into abundance. Will always turn today's luxuries into something that everyone can afford tomorrow.
And you highlighted something with those examples that I think is important to emphasize. These are not political statements or positions. This is about helping people understand how we can do incredible things to help other people out through the capitalist system, because it's all about voluntary cooperation. Just go and do it.
And that's one of the things Alexis Tocqueville, the French aristocrat who visited this country in the 1830s, wrote a book called American Democracy, which sometimes they read today, is still around. But anyway, one of the things he marveled at when he came to this country from France was what he called voluntary associations. People coming together for a shared purpose. It could be to deal with a crisis, it could be to hire a teacher, it could be a professional association, sporting match, whatever. But they just came and did it. In Europe, you sort of asked permission. You waited to be told in the medieval mindset. Here he just did it. And he said, this is the way you train people to be citizens of a republic. Everyone takes responsibility, goes beyond their immediate narrow good stuff, family and all that, but you're involved in other things. And people, again, they just went out and did it and made it happen. They didn't wait for permission. And people from all different backgrounds. Annie Malone, whoever would have thought, a daughter of recently freed slaves, we would come up with chemicals and ways to create new hair products. Where did that come from? She experimented in the kitchen and the like. No one could have planned that. Or Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, totally opposite in terms of background, born into great wealth, married into even greater wealth, and but she decided she wanted to become an artist, a sculptor, and learn from Rodin in France. She had real talent. So you go to Washington, you look at the Titanic Memorial. She created that. These other great creations she did. She started a hospital to treat wounded people in World War I, hired a dozen surgeons and a bunch of nurses in New York, paid their expenses, took to Europe to treat the wounded soldiers, first the French and then when we entered the war. She was a nurse herself for a while. But nothing stood in her way when she offered to the Metropolitan Museum. She was a great art collector, collected hundreds of paintings of American artists, offered to donate it to the Metropolitan Museum, and she would pay for the special wing for it. And the Metropolitan Museum said, "Oh, we don't do American art." So she started her own museum called the Whitney Museum. So again, going and doing. And it's not, success is not always guaranteed. First, hard work. Norman Borlaug, how many thousands of permutations they went through in trying to graft things and make wheat that could withstand disease and have greater yields, and eventually ended hunger and famines, routine famines in places like India and Pakistan. But that kind of drive is always there if you allow it to happen.
And we said before that capitalism is about voluntary trade, but you just highlighted another important point, that it's also not needing permission to go and try things out to create value for other people. That's part of the freedom inherent in capitalism that creates value that doesn't exist in other systems.
And that's why it can't be a top-down system. There's no substitute for a handful of people, no matter how brilliant they are, Hayek understood it. It's about information. And who would have planned for Margaret Rudkin and the Milano cookies and goldfish crackers? Nobody in the top. So people are constantly innovating. And success is not guaranteed. We talked about Malcolm McLean.
So often entrepreneurs do face bankruptcy or failure, or actually go through that, and they keep trying again.
And that's the thing about America, is one of the attributes is failure is not a stigma that you live with forever and are shamed forever. In certain societies, you break the mold and you don't succeed, you're shunned. And that's one of the things we have to avoid today, is you get up, pick up, and try again. Not easy, but you have the opportunity to do it. And that's what, and that's the thing. George Gilder and Thomas Sowell and others ask, what's the difference between us and people in the Stone Age? The answer is we know more. We have more knowledge. And what does knowledge come from? Experimentation. Always out there, experimenting, whether it's in the laboratory, in the marketplace, wherever. Trying things. Don't always work, but you don't know until you try it.
Hear, hear. And that's such a powerful message for young people especially, to go and try things out, that it will be okay if you fail from time to time.
And when you leave school, you're not fully formed. You're always changing, you're always learning, you're always growing. And Norman Borlaug made the point when he talked to students later on in life. He said, don't specialize too much too early, because you never know what you have to draw on. When he started to make the breakthroughs in these seeds and with the strains of wheat, wasn't enough just to do it. How do you get governments to accept it? How do you get all the roadblocks that stand in the way? He said so he had to be thrown back on economics and politics, and how you diplomacy, getting things moving forward. So again, it's not just enough to have a great idea. How do you make it a reality?
You're giving so many incredible examples of people who are leveraging capitalism to do great things, the challenges they go through. One of the things I often talk with business leaders about is the importance of them sharing their own stories as well of what they've gone through to inspire other people.
Well, people, witnesses, live witnesses, are more credible than reading about something. And so again, somebody who goes in and doesn't say, keep your nose clean and all that and you'll succeed, but goes through, people want to know, how did it actually happen? How did you respond?
That's right. And by sharing their own stories, anyone listening, sharing your own story in business, they're giving not only an example for other people to live up to, including hearing the challenges and the perseverance through them, but it gives them the opportunity to realize this is real. This is something that can happen for them as well, that they can strive for. That is so valuable.
Oh, it's real life examples.
Yeah.
And that makes more of an impression than words alone.
So Steve, before we finish this up, I really appreciate this conversation. For the whole Liberty Ventures community, other incredible investors, executives, and entrepreneurs who care about freedom, if you had one message, one lesson for them, what would it be for them to take away?
Don't apologize for the path you choose. Don't apologize for being involved in commerce. It's a noble undertaking. Yes, anything that involves people is not perfect, but the message is people did bad things to each other long before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So given the limitations of human nature, enabling people not only to develop their talents, but end up helping others. You don't even know it, but the whole thing of supply chains, the whole thing of selling. You may not love your neighbor, but you sure want to sell to your neighbor, so I got to figure out, how do I get you to buy what I'm offering? How do I get you to give the resources, you say, voluntarily for what I'm offering? So in a way, it's a human system, contrary to what the Marxists say. It talks about it's humanity and making all the things that happen. You take a restaurant, growing the food, processing the food, delivering the food, the electricity, the refrigerator, everything that goes into it. We don't realize what a miracle it is. And the fact that it's people doing it voluntarily rather than somebody from the top trying to dictate to it is why it works. And that's why this country, for all the garbage problems we have today, is still more people doing it on their own. I mentioned earlier to some people about the terrible 1970s, high inflation, stagnation, U.S. in decline. And look what was aborting then. Apple Computer, Southwest Airlines, FedEx, all these great companies that became big and great were babies then. And you have to have the environment where those things are allowed to happen. Don't kill the baby in the crib. Let the baby grow up.
And what a powerful message to end on for business leaders to take pride in being in business and recognize the value that they create for society.
Exactly. And everything we have. I mean, a lot of these protesters, they have handhelds.
They're using the products of business to criticize business and capitalism.
Yes, and they say greed, blah, blah, blah. Those attributes of human nature have been around forever. The question is, how do you create a society where people devote their efforts not to plundering their neighbor, not to tearing things down, but building in a way where it may benefit you, but ends up benefiting others. And if you get a setback, circumstances change, you get a chance to do it again.
Steve, so excited for you to be speaking at our New York Principal Business Summit coming up. I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit about why you're joining us and what you're going to share with attendees at the conference in a couple of months.
Well, the whole thing is you want to create the environment where people are allowed to create and do good things. And so it's like a garden. If you don't tend the garden, you ain't going to grow the flowers. And I'm in the business of growing flowers now.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're so excited for you joining us there.
Look forward to it. Thank you.